Well, for the latest on the story and its implications, we're joined in studio by international relations expert Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Dr. Navon, it's always a pleasure to have you in studio. Emmanuel Macron, let's start there, is sending a top aide to go and try and save this nuclear deal. Is it really savable?
Look, the Iranians are not behaving like they want to save the deal. They keep breaking it, and they admit it openly. They're enriching uranium. They're attacking targets throughout the Middle East. So it's not like they look like they want to keep the deal. Now, technically, the deal could be kept even without the United States. The fact that the United States pulled out from the deal technically doesn't mean the deal is dead. The other signatories include France, Germany, Britain, the European Union, China, and Russia. So technically the Iranians could keep the deal despite the US sanctions, but they do not seem to be interested. Now, the France cannot by itself offer something to the Iranians to offset the US sanctions, because that's really what the Iranians want. Together, the Europeans, the Chinese, and the Russians could technically continue to have their economic relations with Iran, but it is very hard today because of the US sanctions. And since the US sanctions, basically, there's very little the Europeans can do to bypass those sanctions and keep the deal. So France does not really have much leverage on that. And as I said, it does not look that the Iranians themselves are really interested in keeping the deal.
When you keep on hearing reports, Iran says it doesn't want a war with America, it doesn't want nuclear weapons, and yet we're hearing about the surpassing of the enrichment uranium threshold. What does that mean for the trust that really is broken between the signatories in this whole saga?
Look, obviously, nobody takes the Iranians seriously when they say that they're not interested in nuclear weapons, because if they weren't, so why would we have to deal with, those threats and those agreements that are kept or not kept? So it's obvious, and this has been documented by intelligence agencies from Israel, from the US, and from Europe, that the Iranians are in fact working on a military nuclear program. So nobody believes them when they say that they're not interested in nuclear weapon, and when they say they're not interested in war, again, they're the one shooting at targets throughout the Persian Gulf, whether it's tankers, whether it's Saudi targets, but they also have their long-range missile program, their active support for Shia militia throughout the Middle East, but also in Africa and South America. So the Iranians are not exactly behaving peacefully. In fact, they are redoubling their aggressions throughout the region precisely to test the U.S. administration, and this is why the reaction of the Trump administration in the coming weeks will be critical, because the Iranians really are testing the United States at this point.
I want to bring in what this all means for Israel, who, as we have heard, Benjamin Netanyahu reiterates the same stance all along, also calling on Europe to back the sanctions imposed by the US. But what does all of this mean right now as Israel watches things unfold over this deal?
So as you said, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been calling upon the Europeans to follow the US sanctions, but let's not forget that, as was mentioned before, the deal was also signed with Russia and with China, and they're kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to trade relations with Iran, especially energy imports from Iran. And here, obviously, even if the Europeans were to impose sanctions on Iran and follow the US sanctions, well, you would still have Russia and China has already announced that it has absolutely no intention of respecting or following the US sanctions. And don't forget that China and America are in the middle of a trade war, and so it's not only that China and America disagree very much on Iran, but also on their trade relations. And the Chinese, who have a huge economy and import a huge amount of energy, of natural gas and oil from Iran, have no intention of imposing such sanctions. So even if the Europeans were to impose sanctions, you would still have China and Russia, and that would very much offset such European sanctions.
International relations expert Dr. Emmanuel Navon, as always, thank you so much for